So welcome everyone to 2018. We're a week into it now. What do we think? Nothing bad happened, right? One more trip around the sun, as they say. And I hope everyone's up for another, because we've already traveled more than 1.7 million miles around that journey. Well, that's not true. That only includes the distance we've traveled around the sun. It doesn't take into consideration that our entire solar system is moving through this spiral galaxy of ours. I don't even know if we know how fast we're going through that. And all that means is that we never quite know where we are. And we never go through that same point in space twice. Which makes every trip around the sun, all these rhythms, these natural rhythms, are never exactly the same, are they? We can predict sunrise, we can predict the solstice, but each one's a little different. And it's the same for each of us, really. Day after day, season after season, year after year, waves of change. These waves of change we call life. Waves in the clouds, waves in the sand, waves in the water, waves of sound in the air, waves of quantum energy traveling through space that we call light. Waves of time, waves of emotion, waves of thought. As the ocean waves, said Alan Watt, the universe peoples. We are surfers on a cosmic wave of consciousness. Some say that evolution happens slowly and gradually. Others argue that it happens in waves. At the very least, we can speak of human culture tending to move in waves, with ideas and technologies tending to progress in waves, both geographically, out from a center, and through time. The modern democratic movement that began in 1776, for example, first spread to Europe, and now over the centuries is recognized as really the only legitimate form of government. And at the same time, the shape of democracy is much different than it was 2.5 centuries ago. In various waves, once disenfranchised Americans were made full citizens. And in spite of what may seem like an ebbing tide of democracy, I believe we will see the expansion of democracy once again, for every tide does turn. Feminism, it's often talked about as occurring in waves, with some saying we are now in the fourth wave of feminism, or beginning the fourth wave. And that first wave, it is said, began in the 19th century and it was responsible largely for the suffrage movement. The second wave, writes Adrian Trier-Bienek, became focused on women pursuing careers, reproductive rights, addressing violence against women, and pay equality, just to name a few, as well as a focus on laws like Equal Rights Amendment. The third wave is marked by an integration and inclusion of women of color, both domestically and internationally, where the first two waves were led primarily by educated white women of America and Europe. The third wave includes women from developing countries. One of my favorite, Vandana Shiva, for example, in her 2008 work, Soil Not Oil, addresses the growing social and environmental problems in India and uses an ecofeminist approach to solve them. Much of the third wave of feminism, especially ecofeminism, recognizes that the oppression of women and the oppression of the environment are intimately linked. Shiva writes, the liberation of the earth, the liberation of women, the liberation of all humanity is the next step of freedom we need to work for. And it is the next step of peace that we need to create. So that's the third wave. That's still cresting. And the fourth wave? Well, that's just starting to take shape. Has yet to fully break. And because of this remains difficult to define, but it is generally agreed that this fourth wave transcends the previous waves in different ways. Some say that the movement has outgrown the name feminism, as we outgrow binary sex and gender distinctions of the past. Harriet Rye, PhD, she makes the point that the fourth wave of feminism brings us into the 21st century as women who focus our attention on a question that earlier waves may have addressed, but not to the extent now required. The limits of materialism, the need to turn from concerns about me to concerns for the planet and all its beings. And the sense that for us in the fourth wave, what is most important is to put ourselves in the service of the world. We are not in a post-feminist world. Feminism is alive. However, it is transcending its old limits. It's becoming something new, and it informs every aspect of our society. Every aspect of academics, every aspect of art and literature. And I believe it is accurate when I propose that Kate Raworth's book, Donut Economics, is a natural, logical extension of fourth wave feminism, or maybe even third wave feminism, because it is definitely informed by feminist thought. And it's a feminism that transcends sex, gender, species, and then is inclusive of all human activities. Okay, how many here took home economics class way back when? All right. Any men? All right. What does our word economics mean? Well, we get it from the Greeks, and its original meaning meant household management. Household management is what economics meant. And while modern economic theory has strayed far from that meaning, Raworth brings it back around in Donut Economics, recognizing that managing our resources of the planet, our collective home, and all of its inhabitants, the human family, they must become our priority. We must learn to better manage our home. Where economics is now seen as a quasi-scientific study of what my dictionary defines as the branch of knowledge concerned with the production, consumption, and transfer of wealth. This form of economics, the production, consumption, and transfer of wealth, is now the filter through which all political, academic, and business debate goes through. It's what we think economics is all about. And Raworth points out that the current student taking Econ 101, the basic economy course, and almost everybody has to take it now. So that student in college now, the leaders, the journalists, the entrepreneurs, the teachers, the activists, voters of tomorrow are being taught an economic mindset that is rooted, as she says, in the textbooks of 1950, which in turn are rooted in the theories of 1850. Just think about those. What was going on in 1850? What was going on in 1950? Economics is a story. It's a story rooted in slavery, rooted in colonization, the genocide of native peoples, rooted in a pre-scientific worldview that taught the world operates like a clock, built by the master clockmaker with interchangeable parts and pieces, and here for our use, because we're special. But we know better now. We understand interdependence. We understand colonization was wrong. Genocide was wrong. We know better now. It's time for us to do better. So Rayworth proposes a new story, a new way to look at economics that recognizes that we live on a planet with finite resources, that recognizes the interdependence of life. It recognizes that there are no invisible hands coming down from above to miraculously deliver a more just and peaceful world. And the shape of this new economic model? Well, it's a donut. Because who doesn't love a donut? That is donut economics in a nutshell. Now, the goal of this model, instead of assumed infinite growth, in spite of living on a finite planet with finite resources, because that's the goal of traditional economics. So instead, Rayworth writes, what if we started economics not with its long-established theories, but with humanity's long-term goals, and then sought out the economic thinking that would enable us to achieve them? And that's the basis for this donut. It begins with a social foundation of well-being for all people and an ecological ceiling of planetary pressure, that is, the natural limit of growth. And between those two limits, so the inside limit is the social foundation, the outside limit is ecological, and in the donut, in that sweet spot in the middle, that's a safe and just space for us all. The donut is what it all looks like in two dimensions, with the whole being that critical human deprivation. Everything in that hole, if it exists in that hole, it's human deprivation, and everything outside the donut representing critical planetary degradation. This is what it looks like now. When we take this model and use what is going on in the world today, is the assessment of our current situation. Lots of red. Red is never good. Unless it's a jelly in a donut, right? But different story. Lots of red here. And not even, some of this, like some of these gray areas, don't think those are good because those are just things we haven't quantified, like certain types of pollution. We haven't put a number to them because nobody has cared enough to put a number to them. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the details of how we fall short. We know all the facts already. We know about climate change. We know about the loss of biodiversity. We know about injustice and violence around the world. But what we have with this new model, for the first time, is an economic model that takes these things where we're not doing so great, and puts them into economic consideration. That is what is truly revolutionary about this model. Now, the book is long. It's complex, includes extensive notes and a bibliography, yet it remains totally understandable for non-economists like me. It's my son who's going to be the economics major, not me. And I'm not going to try to sum it all up here, because there's just too much information there, but I encourage everyone to read and discuss the book, because as Rayworth points out, we all need to be economists now. For too long, we have let the politicians and the pundits bully us on all things economic. And democracy demands we start paying attention. Now, as a brief example of why I think this model is important, I want to use a cup of coffee to make my point. Because what goes better with donuts than coffee, right? So let's say there's 2 cups of coffee. One costs $2.50, the other is $3. And you were told that the beans for each were both sourced from the same region in Guatemala. And we ask the obvious question, well, why is there a price difference? And we're told one is organic, fair trade, locally roasted, and sold by a local company. And the other is not organic, not fair trade, not locally roasted, and sold by a multinational conglomerate. Fair enough, we say. What about the taste? We're given a sample of each, and they taste nearly identical. So how do we choose? From the traditional economic mindset, we will likely choose the less expensive cup and move right along, right? Never taking into consideration that the farmers who grew that coffee are not given a fair wage for their work and are routinely exposed to dangerous pesticides and herbicides. We don't care that the abject poverty in the region supported by our choice is contributing to serious political unrest in the region. That's what happens when people live in abject poverty. And so that leads to greater militarization on our part because we don't want to deal with unrest down there, so we need to build up. Oh wait, now that costs our taxes. So are we including that in that extra, that 50 cents we're saving? And because coffee farming under this model is not all that profitable, some farmers choose a more lucrative crop. A crop that contributes to America's growing drug addiction problem. So in paying less, again, we are choosing to pay more in taxes and insurance to support increased militarization, law enforcement, and drug recovery costs. When we choose that cheaper cup of coffee, we are supporting, in part, destruction of critical rainforest land because there's no oversight on what's going on, as there are in fair trade and organic coffee farms. The water pollution that is being created by the chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides from the non-organic are going into the Amazon, going into the ocean, destroying fish and wildlife of all kinds. When we choose the cheaper cup of coffee, we are choosing to pass along the cost of this environmental degradation to our children and grandchildren. We're passing it along, but we save 50 cents. When we choose that cheaper cup of coffee roasted in some central location by a corporate conglomerate, we are choosing to deposit our money into overseas tax shelters, their overseas tax shelters, rather than into our local economy where it circulates more freely when we shop locally and buy locally. And that benefits us directly. You see, traditional economics does not take into consideration any external costs. And all these things are external costs. What happens down the road once the product is in your hands? What happens to the paper cup and the plastic lid after we finish it? Well, we pay for that. When we choose that other cup of coffee, we are supporting human rights, a cleaner environment, a strong local economy. And yes, it costs more up front, but in the long run, it actually costs less in actual money and not coincidentally human pain and suffering. We all need to be economists because we are the economy. The choices we make drive the larger economic structures that drives every aspect of our society. And this new economic model, this latest wave in economics, is just now starting to take shape. And it will be some time before we are able to surf that wave. But it behooves us to pay attention to it, to study it and talk about it. I believe donut economics, clearly informed by all waves of feminism, is in full alignment with our Unitarian Universalist values. Referencing Gandhi's famous quote, "Be the change you want to see in the world," Rayworth writes, "When it comes to new economic thinking, draw the change you want to see in the world too. By combining the well-known power of verbal framing with the hidden power of visual framing, we can give ourselves a far better chance of writing a new economic story, the one that we so desperately need for a safe and just 21st century." Without this clear picture, without a clear vision as is presented within the book, without some idea of where we want to go and how to get there, our collective effort for social justice and world peace, they don't have anywhere to go if we're not dealing with the underlying structures that support the current way of life. So, donut economics provides a way to actually to reach our goals, our stated goals as Unitarian Universalists. So I invite you to consider how a donut and a cup of coffee just might be what the world needs right now. So join me, please, in a cup of coffee and a donut, and we'll see what happens next. So be it. Amen, and blessed be.